Today, I'd like to start answering the question, how and what does Jesus teach through what he doesn't do and through the ways he doesn't call people? During my time as a monk, Dom Elias of Gethsemane said something that's true of all strict observance monasteries. He said, placidity teases out toxicity. It was said of Christ that the teacher would be a sign that will be contradicted, so that the thoughts of all hearts might be revealed. And we see that operating within the story of the Samaritan woman. The text says the disciples were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" On the one hand, I see the gospel writer giving the teacher a free hand. On the other, it's a clue to the disciples' inner monologues. Those questions may well have been in their hearts, but they didn't need to voice them because they trusted him from whom the answer came. In his little commentary about 4 months more, then comes the harvest, Jesus is calling out our ideas about fulfillment. He says, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. This is preparing us for the ego-bound, dualistic reality of daily life. There will be times when life seems like it's all output, no input, all giving and no receiving. However, to guess at the teacher's deeper meaning, the word was planted in our hearts before it was made flesh, and the word made flesh, who'd been with the Father in the beginning, announced it before our ears were open. Indeed, the task of salvation is being accomplished whether or not we choose to accept it. In the fullness of time, the eyes of our intuition open. When the aha moment or the realization occurs, it's possible to see the ways we've always been opening to it. Scholars call that narrative move intercalation, when a theme is developed by interrupting a story with what seems like a tangent or entirely different story. I dropped the term here in part to remind myself that I'm not above the pretensions of armchair scholarship. But we should note that it's after the bit about sowing and reaping that the Samaritans come to Jesus, this time not saying he's a prophet, but fully convinced he's the savior of the world. So I think accepting Jesus as savior involves accepting that on an ego level, there will be disparities, but those disparities will bolster intuition and teach in realizations instead of reason. This will stretch our tolerance for stress, since realizations involve creative tension, grief, and growing pains. But it may well be how God and his Messiah both choose to operate. When the royal official, whose son is deathly ill, seeks Jesus, the teacher isn't stoked about people needing signs and wonders. We might hear a bit of stress in the anonymous official's voice, though. "Sir," he says, "come down before my little boy dies." In other words, the point is my suffering child. And that's interesting. Jesus started the gospel by saying, "Come and see." And the wedding at Cana threw the question back on Jesus. Come and see what it's like not to have the wine that symbolizes celebration of poverty. I'd like to think the royal official absorbed the lesson veiled in correction about the silliness of clinging to miracles. I also think this is our next clear view of humanity saying, "Come and see," to Jesus. Ramdas recalls Maharaj-ji often shooing him out of the room with the word "jao," which means go away. He would often give devotees a banana to feed a sick relative, explaining that the relative will be okay, only to have the relative eat the banana and die. The message, I think, is death is okay. André Bessette, the French-Canadian saint with a deep devotion to Saint Joseph, once yelled at an impaired woman for coming to see him in what he deemed a skimpy dress. She might have been on crutches, though my memory's hazy. In any case, he shooed her out of the room only to have the woman get upset and storm out of the room on miraculously healed feet. I say all this to add a little possible richness to the teacher's words, "Go, your son will live." I'm not sure the teacher intended to perform a healing, nor am I sure that annoyance at the question was entirely absent from Jesus' voice, especially given the proximity to suffering to which it invited the teacher. But here's an astonishing thing. It was at the same hour that Jesus said, "Go, your son will live," that the child's fever broke. And it's important that the royal official decided to see it as cause to believe instead of a coincidence. He decided to see divine intentionality where he could have seen mere synchronicity. Ultimately and additionally, it's become personally important to hear annoyance and non-intentionality in Jesus' voice, because that would ask the royal official to examine his own despair, and it would place the great miracle at what may have been, for the royal official, his darkest moment. That's theology by Josh, which you can discard as you please. Such readings claim very little except the ability to moderate the intensity of our self-imposed suffering, and that's no small thing. Right or wrong, I hear Jesus trying to make a point. The teacher might be saying, only when we feel great love and security can our toxicity rise to the surface. This is the case as well with all the trauma our bodies have stored in our respective limbic systems. If we're feeling it, it's because we're safe and loved enough to do so. It was His Holiness Pope Francis who helped me put this together. Abba Francis, in a public audience, once fielded a question from a young boy. On approaching the microphone, the boy began to cry. The Pope invited him closer to himself, saying in Italian, "Tell me in my ear." After a moment, and with the young man's permission, Francis revealed the whispered question. The boy wondered if his recently deceased atheist father is in heaven. Of the young boy, Francis said he had the courage to cry because of the love his father had for him. I was and am floored at the deep love the Pope shows, not just to devotees of Christ, but to all humanity. But that isn't really the point of the story. The point is one of hidden ladder mysticism, of progress that's not immediately obvious. Though our lives seem full of loss, uncomfortable redirection, ever deepening consciousness of flaws, and on the deep end, the apparent absence of God, it's ultimately totally safe. We're wrong about the absence of God, but even if we weren't, the task of being non-manipulatively present, of using healthy force for non-clinging, would still be part of each practitioner's curriculum, like it or not. Today, I choose to see it as more an opportunity than a bummer. But of course, you'd be right if you guessed that that was pretty heavy. Silence is the only word in any language that properly captures absolute acceptance and abject frustration in a single word. But as I'm sure many of you have said it, so have I. And until I can treat the entire world's flaws with a father's compassion, I am saying it, and I will say it.